Welcome, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about at the podium. We have a creed, and I'd like to say it for you so you can see what you think about the Seattle Atheist Church creed. So, Seattle Atheist Church was founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We try to be excellent to each other, and we believe in good, because good works in non-mysterious ways. So today, we'll get to our talk in just a moment, but we have some new people here and some old faces returning, so welcome. It's good to see you. Yay, Jack!
All right, sorry for the delay. So, this talk is a follow-up to the talk I gave a few months ago about utilitarianism. I'll start off with a brief recap of some of that material and then move on to discussing some examples, which is really the fun part of the philosophy of ethics. So, to start off with, the formulation of utilitarianism that makes the most sense to me goes something like, one ought to do the action that maximizes the expected happiness, understood as pleasure in the absence of pain. This is a formulation of hedonistic act utilitarianism. All that matters is the impact of actions on the pleasure and pain of conscious creatures. There are no other morally relevant considerations. And actions are the object of moral considerations, not rules or personal character or anything else. It's actions. Because calculating the consequences of any particular action is very computationally expensive, and spending time doing those calculations means that you aren't available to do other actions. It's valuable to take some computational shortcuts in the form of rules of thumb. So, for example, don't lie, don't steal, don't kill. These are pretty good general rules to follow, even though there might be circumstances where violating these rules is permitted or even required morally. Finally, I introduced some terminology from J.J.C. Smart of right versus wrong, rational versus irrational, and praiseworthy versus blameworthy. I think it's worth it to go into this with a little bit more detail. Sorry. These distinctions help illustrate a few morally relevant distinctions that are very easy to conflate, but that we have to get right if we're serious about getting the right answers to questions of ethics. An action is right if it is the one action available to you at the moment that, in fact, does produce the best possible happiness in the world or prevent the greatest possible suffering. Or, in the case of a tie, any one of the set of actions that are tied for producing the greatest possible happiness. All other actions are wrong to varying degrees. An action is rational under similar conditions, but taking into account what you know at the time, what occurs to you, etc. Rational actions are the best that anyone can be expected to do, since we're always constrained by the limits of our knowledge. These actions are often confused with actions that are praiseworthy, but it's important that we recognize that distinction. Praising someone for an action while blaming them for taking an action are both actions themselves. And though they're actions that have the effect of encouraging or discouraging similar behavior under similar circumstances in the future, both for the person being praised or blamed and for anyone who witnesses them being praised or blamed. Each of these pairs of words represents a spectrum of ways that we can judge an action. And each spectrum is orthogonal to the others. That is to say, it's possible for an action to be right and rational, but blameworthy, because it worked out in this one case, but we want to discourage it from happening in the future, or to discourage other people from doing it in the future under circumstances that are similar, but different in important ways they might not realize. For example, maybe it's okay to cross the road without waiting for the crosswalk signal to tell you it's safe, because you looked both ways and you made a judgment call. That's right in the sense that you got where you're going faster, and rational because you had good reason to believe it was safe. But blameworthy because maybe a child saw you just walk across the street, maybe they didn't notice you look both ways, and so they think that maybe it's fine to just go ahead and cross whenever they like and put themselves into danger. It's also possible for an action to be right but irrational and blameworthy. Like if you cross the street without even bothering to look both ways, but it just so happened that no one was coming. It would be irrational because you had no reason to think it was safe. It's blameworthy not just for the risk of influencing children towards dangerous behavior, but also because you yourself shouldn't repeat that action in similar circumstances. But it turned out to be right because you made it across just fine, you got to where you're going faster, and no one else was around to see you be influenced by your recklessness. Okay, so let's jump into some more lengthy examples. So examples in the philosophy of ethics are used to illustrate how principles that we talk about in the abstract might be applied in practice, and they're often designed specifically to test or challenge our existing moral intuitions or to probe the boundary between two competing principles. So our first example is one that we touched on last time and might be one of the most well-known examples in the philosophy of ethics, the trolley problem. The general form of the problem, as presented on Wikipedia, is this. There's a runaway trolley barreling down the railway tracks. Ahead on the tracks, there are 5 people tied up and unable to move. The trolley is headed straight for them, and you're standing some distance off in the train yard next to a lever. If you pull this lever, the trolley will switch to a different set of tracks. However, you notice that there is one person on the side track. You have 2 options. 1, do nothing, and the trolley kills the 5 people on the main track. 2, pull the lever, diverting the trolley onto the side track, where it will kill 1 person. Which is the most ethical choice? This example is designed to probe the boundary between 2 competing principles. On the one hand, it seems it's morally required to save someone's life if you can, and especially if it's easy for you to do, as easy as flipping a switch. On the other hand, it's morally prohibited to kill someone. This situation prompts us to reconsider the extent of our commitment to the prohibition against killing. Killing another human being is wrong under pretty much every system of ethics, but maybe there are circumstances that make it permissible or even morally required to kill someone. Maybe saving the lives of 5 other human beings is such a circumstance, and killing 1 person to save 5 is a price worth paying. Just to take a quick pulse of the room at this point, who thinks you should flip the switch? Good number. Some people unsure. Who thinks you should leave the switch alone? Okay, a couple. Given just the limited information we have, I personally think you should flip the switch, causing the death of 1 person and preventing the deaths of 5, for a net of 4 human lives saved. For those who disagree, I'm interested to hear why during our post-talk discussion. It's hard for me to imagine what sort of consideration in this case would be compelling enough to be worth a net of 4 human lives, but I can see that there may be something really important that I'm missing here. Note, of course, that the number 5 is arbitrary. It's often picked in these kind of examples because it's small enough that we can still grasp the full gravity of weighing 5 lives against 1, whereas it's notoriously difficult for us humans to comprehend the suffering of 1,000,000. Just as it was arbitrarily selected, the number can be arbitrarily increased. It could be 100 people on the other track, or 1,000. Perhaps at that point a mere trolley is no longer practical for the example, but we can easily substitute it for a heavy freight train or something else with the same morally relevant effects. For those who think that it's wrong to flip the switch, consider whether your conclusion changes as the number of people at risk scales up. Conversely, for those who agree that you should flip the switch, the number can just as easily be arbitrarily scaled down. Would your conclusion change if it was just 2 people that would be hit if we do nothing? Is just 1 net life worth killing for? What about 1 person tied to the tracks and 1 person tied next to the tracks such that their arm is still in the way of the train? Is it worth killing 1 person to save 1 person and prevent an amputation? What if it was just a single finger? Is it still worth it? If not, why not? Well, anyway, if it's 5 against 1, I say flip the switch. But remember I said before that that's given just the limited information that we have and the fact that the urgency of the situation prevents us from spending time to gather more information. That is to say, with Smart's distinctions, that I think flipping the switch is the rational action to take. But is it the right one? Let's think about a few ways that choice could go wrong. After the trolley takes the alternate track, kills the 1 person, and we rescue the 5, we might find out in the investigation that's sure to follow that while we save the lives of 5 average people who are productive members of society, who have families, people care about them, who pay their taxes and obey the law, the person tied up to the other track was someone of exceptional moral worth. Perhaps it was Jimmy Carter tied up there, who now can't build more homes for those in need or finish eradicating the guinea worm. Perhaps it was a researcher who had, just the night before, discovered a cure for all cancers. It seems plausible that the good that such a person would have done in the world, understood in the utilitarian way to be the impact that they would have had on the aggregate happiness of conscious creatures, would be several orders of magnitude greater than the good that an average person does. Perhaps 100 times greater, or 1,000 times greater, or maybe even more. The world would have been much better off had that 1 person continued living and continued pursuing their life's work. So much so, in fact, that it would have been better for that 1 person to survive at the expense of the 5 average people that were tied to the tracks. Perhaps the difference would be mitigated to some degree when this information became public, as the 5 survivors might be so inspired by the good works of the 1 who was sacrificed that they dedicate their lives to doing good in the most effective way they possibly can. They may or may not be able to do nearly as much good, since they don't have the connections and experience of a former president of the United States who's been doing charitable work for decades, or the technical training to be able to research cures for diseases, though these skills may come with time and effort. Maybe. But it seems unlikely that it would end up being a good trade in the end, at least to me. Of course, there's also the possibility that 1 or more of them would suffer a debilitating case of survivor's guilt, which would significantly hinder their contributions to the good of the world. An honest and thorough utilitarian calculus would need to recognize and account for all of these effects and possibilities. Or consider another angle. Maybe the 1 person tied to the tracks was an average person, but the 5 were each morally deficient in some way. Perhaps each of them is a relatively high-level person in organized criminal cartel who's responsible for trafficking drugs to vulnerable communities. Perhaps each of them is a psychopath, physically unable to be inspired to do good in the world by the sacrifice of the 1. Maybe 1 of them is a joker. Batman finally caught him and tied him up to the tracks because the criminal justice system just keeps dropping the ball and letting him escape. And maybe 1 of them is the next rising fascist dictator who, if not stopped, stands to cause immense amount of avoidable suffering in the world. It seems that it would have been better to let the trolley run them over, even if no one was tied up to the other track. The addition of the death of an average person on top of that is even worse, but represents a mere drop in the bucket of the human misery that's sure to come. Okay, so the data seems to indicate, as we do more experiments and figure out what people think about these various situations, that most people do agree that we should flip the switch. But, and here's where we can introduce variance to the example that will test our intuitions. Here's one variant called the Fat Man on the Bridge variant. And the difference here is that, so there's still the trolley coming, still about to hit 5 people that are tied up on the tracks. But the difference here is that you notice it as you're walking over a bridge that's over the tracks, and walking next to you is a particularly fat person who you're absolutely sure will stop the trolley if you push them over and onto the tracks and the trolley hits them. So while most people agree that, let's go ahead and poll the room. In this case, do you think, who thinks that we should push the fat man over the bridge? And who thinks that we should refrain from doing that and allow the trolley to hit and kill 5 people? Okay. The sentiment in the room is pretty much in line with the data that we have, that while most people do agree that you should flip the switch, that number drops significantly when you have to actually push somebody off a bridge, even though the net effect of saving 4 lives is the same. So, I guess, one question is why is there this difference? And there's a whole lot of different ways to explain that. Personally, I just cannot seem to internalize the idea that the trolley will actually be stopped by pushing somebody off the bridge. And I know that the problem is set up in such a way that that's guaranteed, but I just can't imagine that a trolley that's going to plow through 5 people can be stopped by 1, even if they're significantly bigger. So I'm not sure if that's if that sort of like leakage through the setup of the problem is more generally widespread or not. But one way to understand the discrepancy is called the doctrine of double effect. And this sort of tries to draw the line between complete absolutism in prohibiting killing and the apparent utilitarian conclusion of killing someone whenever it's convenient and could save more lives. So from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on the topic, Thomas Aquinas is credited with introducing the principle of double effect in his discussion of the permissibility of self-defense in his Summa Theologica. Killing one's assailant is justified, he argues, provided that one does not intend to kill him. Somewhat odd. Aquinas observes that nothing hinders one act from having 2 effects, only one of which is intended, while the other is beside the intention. Accordingly, the act of self-defense may have 2 effects. One, the saving of one's life, the other, the slaying of the aggressor. As Aquinas' discussion continues, justification is provided that rests on characterizing the defensive action as a means to a goal that is justified. Later versions of the double effect principle all emphasize the distinction between causing a morally great harm as a side effect of pursuing a good end, and causing a morally grave harm as a means of pursuing a good end. The New Catholic Encyclopedia provides 4 conditions for the application of the principle of double effect. 1, the act itself must be morally good or at least indifferent. 2, the agent may not positively will the bad effect, but may permit it. If he could attain the good effect without the bad effect, he should do so. The bad effect is sometimes said to be indirectly voluntary. 3, the good effect must flow from the action at least as immediately in the order of causality, though not necessarily in the order of time, as the bad effect. In other words, the good effect must be produced directly by the action, not by the bad effect. Otherwise, the agent would be using a bad means to a good end, which is never allowed. And the good effect must be sufficiently desirable to compensate for the allowing of the bad effect. That's the 4th piece. That last 4th clause there sounds suspiciously like utilitarianism to me. But so in this case, with that doctrine in mind, we can sort of see a way that in the first case, flipping the switch is permitted, while in the second case, pushing the fat man is forbidden. Because pushing the fat man is directly a bad that is used as a means to a good end. Whereas flipping the switch, you are diverting the trolley and letting nature run its course, somewhat literally, and the trolley hits the one person, and that's a side effect. You didn't intend for that to happen. If there was a 3rd track that didn't have the person, you'd pick that track instead. So in this case, this doctrine seems to draw a morally relevant distinction between causing evil and allowing evil to come to pass. Okay, so let's try out another variant that might test that further. Also from Wikipedia, called the Fat Man on the Loop. So, as before, a trolley is hurtling down a track towards 5 people, and as before, you can divert it onto a separate track. However, this diversion loops back around to rejoin the main track, so diverting the trolley still leaves it on a path to run over 5 people. But on this track is a single fat person who, when he is killed by the trolley, will stop it from continuing to the 5 people. Should you flip the switch? Well, that's an interesting plot twist. Now you don't have to push someone off a bridge, but you still have to kill them, because if they weren't there, perhaps you could untie them or something, then the trolley would just loop around and kill the 5 people anyway. So what do you think? Who thinks that we should flip the switch in this case? And who thinks we should leave it alone?
I wonder if it would make a difference if you said a man with a bunch of bricks that would stop it versus a fat man. Like, I think I'm having problems with the fat man because my concern is of discriminating against fat. So there's also that, like, I would bend over backwards to not hurt the fat man.
Indeed. It is kind of unfortunate but that's a standard example in the philosophical literature. Perhaps we should revisit that.
To expand on what she's saying, there are people who will actually put amoral judgment on whether or not somebody is fat, the same way that they might if somebody runs a drug cartel or something. So they would probably default more towards somebody who is fat than somebody who just has a bunch of bricks, for whether or not they die because fat is bad.
Like less deserving of life or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we'll get into further discussion afterwards. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So, with this different variant here, the death of the fat man seems to be a means to the end. Seems to still be a means to the end of saving the 5, just as in the variant where you push him off the bridge. So it would seem here that the doctrine of double effect still forbids killing him. It's kind of interesting. So I'm going to let those examples percolate a little bit, and in your minds, we'll move over to a slightly different pair of examples. One that has been particularly challenging for utilitarianism. So consider, and these are sort of parallel to the trolley problems, consider a hospital, maybe you're the administrator of a hospital, and you have to figure out how to allocate scarce resources, right? There's only a certain limited number of doctors who can perform surgeries, a certain limited number of medicines that you can dole out, and everyone who comes in has different needs. So in this first variant, consider a hospital that is currently treating 5 people, again 5, who have a somewhat early stage of a disease, and enough medicine to treat all of them. But then someone else comes in with a very late stage of the disease that would take much more of the same medicine to treat him. And you only got enough to either treat one person who has a late stage of the disease or 5 people who have the early stage of the disease, who, if you don't treat now, it will develop into something much worse pretty quickly. Who thinks that we should give medicine to the one person? Who thinks we should give the medicine to the 5? Okay. Now consider a variant where a hospital has 5 patients whose organs are failing, and each of them has a different organ that's failing, and there's just not enough of these organs to go around. So, in all likelihood, these people are probably going to die on the operating table, or on the wait list rather. But as luck would have it, some healthy person comes in for a checkup, and voila, this person is a match for all 5 of the people who need organs.
Right.
And,
It's just the UPS delivery guy.
right. That's a perfectly healthy person, just going about their business, come in for a routine checkup. Now, they have the option, of course, of killing this person and harvesting his organs and distributing them to the other people who need them. Who thinks that they should do that? Who thinks they should allow him to go free and allow the others to die of natural causes? Okay, so I would agree. This example is typically used as sort of a gotcha for utilitarianism, because it sure seems that utilitarians ought to say that you ought to kill the 5 to kill the 1 to save the 5, just as in the trolley case. And maybe if all of life was just sort of a one-shot game, maybe that's the way to go. But if you consider all of the consequences of the action, right, which you really have to do if you want to get to the right answers, some of the consequences are going to be that now hospitals are going to get a reputation for being a dangerous place for healthy people to go, because you never know who else is in need there, and when somebody might just capture you and harvest your organs, right? And over years and years and years, decades and decades, having people be afraid to go to the doctor when they feel sick will actually cause way, way, way more harm than saving 5 people's lives would prevent. And so, in the sort of multiple iteration game that usually life actually is, where you have to make many decisions over the course of a long period of time, and people get information about the decisions that were made, usually sways the calculation the other way. And I think that we can say, for utilitarian reasons, that the hospital should not be harvesting healthy people's organs without their consent, just whenever it's convenient. So I'd like to open it up to the discussion, but before I do, one last point I wanted to make. A lot of these examples focus on the morality of just one decision that's usually really well designed by the example to be a choice between one course of action or another. And so that's often confused with figuring out the right solution to the problem. So a lot of times utilitarian reasoning is condemned for saying that, here's some particular action, maybe killing somebody or stealing something or whatever. And utilitarians are committed to saying that, to agreeing to violate our normal rules against such things, if the utility is even slightly better for doing it, for violating the rules than for following the rules. And sometimes that's true, but usually it's not true, because there's usually a lot of actions that you have available to you at any given time. So you might find yourself in a situation where maybe I could spend some time figuring out whether I should kill this person to save 1.5 people or something, or I could also donate a whole bunch of money to the Against Malaria Foundation, right? And by doing that, I can save a lot of lives in a guaranteed way without the problem of having to kill somebody. So there are a lot of actions that are available to each of us at any given time, and it's worth evaluating which of those actually produces the best consequences, and not focusing on one action and trying to figure out whether or not to do it alone. So with that, I'd like to open up to discussion, and it's our custom to circle around in chairs and have an open forum.